Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am joined by the most amazing Peter Dunn, the scout meister himself, the finder of talents. I remember my first conversation with Peter Dunn was at I believe, Euphoria episode, and he was telling me
Yeah.
about how you found this player who was playing Vayne, and he was not of age yet to play, and it turned out that this player happened to be Karzi. Do I remember that
Yeah.
correctly, Peter?
Yeah, it was something like that. I can't remember exactly what champion it was, but yeah, it was a long time ago. Yeah, but it was definitely Kazi. But yeah, it reminds me a lot of things back in the old days. But no, thank you very much for having me, and really looking forward to seeing what we're going to be talking about today.
All right.
Lots of interesting things this off season.
So usually on my end, right? It's like I go into these conversations rather raw. It's like I know about you. I know, of course, of the details that are shared in public, and we just see where the conversation goes, and hopefully it goes in a direction which is interesting for the both of us. On my end, it's when I think back to what I know about you. I know that you're very interested in football and sports, and this is where initially, if I understand correctly, that your idea of coaching came from. How did it transfer to League of Legends? How did you start in INTZ in Brazil?
So actually, League is basically the only. Sorry, football is literally the only reason I was in League.
Mm.
I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not really much of a gamer. I mean, the only games that I've really played, like at a high level, I guess, are like Football Manager variations.
Okay,
And
okay.
I'm a big fan of the Sim City kind of stuff. That
Mm.
kind of thing. And basically, I never really. Because of my sports coaching, that's how I got involved in esports in the
Mm-hmm.
first place. So I played over the top tabletop games, things like Magic the Gathering and things like this a lot when I was younger.
Yes, yes.
But yeah, sports coaching is what got me links to people that were working in esports in China. It's what helped me to understand this is a thing. And then obviously, like when I left China, it was what kept me, vaguely interested, because League of Legends was something that I'd followed. I didn't realize we would have esports as a thing like we have it now. You were back
Mm.
there in season 1, season 2. It
Yes,
was
yes.
it was 5 people in an apartment, going to lands on the weekend after school and things like this. So it's really, it's yeah, it's been a long time since then. But I mean, in terms of how it's informed my coaching, I would say that a lot of my ideas for what coaching is and what coaching should be defined as come from traditional sports.
Mm.
So you have, when I was younger, I used to study a lot of football coaching. I did some of my badges, not all of them. I couldn't turn around and coach, Manchester United by now. I don't have the qualifications, but I started on that path. I could probably be an assistant coach. I'd have to check exactly what an FA certification level 2 means. But like but it was just something that I just found interesting, and it's something that I studied. And when I was studying inspirations for sports coaching, I look at people like Rinus Mikel. I look at people like Marcelo Bielsa. These guys inform a lot of how I kind of approach coaching in general. So I say that was the link.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I remember when like the first time I got the coaching gig, like then back in season 5, I still wanted to be a player, and my approach was, it's like if I'm gonna do this coaching thing, I need to take inspiration from somewhere. So I just did as much reading as possible, and I made it into kind of my own stew. I was reading about Sir Alex Ferguson, the big names, the names of Phil Jackson from all the sports areas. I was just thinking there has to be crossover because in the end we are managing people, and when you're managing people, the same kind of tales tell themselves, and you can prepare yourself as much as possible. I'm curious. So I didn't realize you were that OG that you started already back in season 1 and 2. How was it like back then? You mentioned that you worked in China. How did that go about? Could you tell me more? Because your Leaguepedia page doesn't go that far. I know that we've had some conversations, but they were on the side, so I didn't know if I could bring it up or not. In terms of
I
this
mean,
history. But what can you share more about your time in China?
I don't push it too much, but basically, my parents were diplomats. I was studying, to go along the diplomatic career trajectory. I did my undergraduate in the UK in history, and I decided that my specialization was going to be in Sino-EU relations. If you're going to work with people from a different background, you want to see the educational background that they have, in this area and how things are taught, and that's kind of why I was in China.
Okay.
What was I doing in China? Honestly, living there, studying there, working there, and esports was just something I just did in my spare time. It was basically, I think we call it a little bit. I hesitate to even say performance coaching because I'm not a qualified performance coach, but it was kind of like team owner coming and saying, have a talk with my players because, you have some background in conventional sports. Maybe you want to have a talk with them there. And it was, doing scouting for international competition. That's how I kind of learned League of Legends. It was writing scouting reports, and this was, back then you didn't get paid. You got like your taxi fee and your meal paid for you. So I hesitate to call it a profession. But it was very interesting. Back in those days, obviously, League was still growing, and you have people who are, how should I say this? Like there was it's hard for people to imagine now the kind of backlash that people back in those days, especially. I don't want to make cultural assume everything about a country, but there are definitely some, how should I say, some parents of some Chinese people who very, very, very much did not want them to go into esports over other careers, to the point where maybe, people became estranged, from their families for wanting to do the things that, we consider a standard today. And I think that back in those days, it was very, very, very amateur. It was like online tournaments. It was, the tournament finals are in a shopping mall. Like you would be literally in the middle of a shopping mall. They'd put the curtains, like in the center square. They put the curtains to block out the light, and then you'd have like 50 chairs or something. It's not even a major shopping mall, like a shopping mall somewhere in the suburb somewhere. And this was what people did back in the day. It was awesome.
Nice.
But very amateur, nothing like the stadiums we have today.
Yeah, for sure.
I call them 3,000 seater stadiums in China. Nothing like that.
I remember, like even some of the tournaments over here were completely mental. I remember there was one called the Berlin Campus Party, and at first I was like, wow, this is a nice venue. But then I realized that we are just a corner in nothingness, and apparently it's just like this place that was rented out for the creator of the internet to come to speak. And they just put our tournament in the corner of that venue. There was no seats, there was no crowd, there was no nothing, but we were just in that corner playing our tournament and having the time of our life. And this was back when this was season 2. I was like 16, and this was one of the first few times where I traveled abroad, and I was under the assumption that I thought basically I needed to buy food, and buying food for me was a new thing. So I just pretty much just bought cookies, and then my idea was that I'm going to maintain a sugar rush for the whole tournament, and that was a terrible idea. So my diet was just as good as the venue. It was a perfect combination.
You have fold out chairs as well, right? They get really uncomfortable after 30 minutes.
Of course. Sometimes we had to. Like, to keep a chair, we would pick it up and just walk around with it, just so we wouldn't lose the chair. Because sometimes I would come back to my PC and it would just be gone. And that was just another thing.
And how much did you guys travel between these tournaments? Was there one in like Paris and one in? But it's really hard for me to understand because for esports in Europe, I only came in season 6. I was in China and then I was in Brazil, so I've really got no idea what it was like in the early days, other than speaking to European people at international tournaments. So what were these tournaments like? Were they always in Berlin? Were they always in Paris?
It was a little bit all over the place. Like at the time, the main thing you'd hope was that the organizations would pay for the tickets. Like your flights and so forth. Like that was usually like the contract you negotiated. You would have paid travel. And I was like, yes, this is the contract I want. take my rights away for this. And then it would just be qualifications online or invitations. Like if you're a part of like the big teams, Fnatic, whatever, then you would just be invited to the tournaments, and then it would just be like all over the place. Sometimes it wouldn't be only in Europe. It would be in North America. It would be in Brazil, all the IEMs and those circuits. It would just be all over the place. And usually, like if you travel to a country, it would be not very rarely in the big cities. It would be you would arrive in the big city and then you take a bus for 8 hours. Like this event I did in the UK. I arrived in London and then bus 6 hours to a place called Telford in the middle of nowhere, and I was lucky on the bus that I didn't get stabbed, because there was this man who was staring at me the entire bus ride. 6 hours. He barely blinked. I was surprised. Like the man was probably like putting eye drops into his eyes while I was not looking or something. It was a good experience.
And was it in like a gymnasium? Like, what kind of, like, did you go to school or something? Because like it was always in shopping centers for us. But I was just wondering what it was like for you guys. Was it in a gym or something?
So this one in particular was in I believe, storage facility.
Wow.
I think it was just a massive building that used to be a storage facility, but it was kind of a venue, I would say. It wasn't too bad. There was just, I think they made a lot of their money through alcohol. Like there was a lot of things were always going on at these events. Usually esports was like a third thought that just came last. And then there was like bingo and drinking and all that jazz and concerts at the same time. And then all of a sudden the announcer says, and now for the final of blah, blah, blah tournament sponsored by this shitty brand of keyboards.
I mean, like, it's absolutely crazy when you go and look at things like the World Championships these days. Like we're only talking about things 10 years ago, no? 11 years ago.
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts. It's like even when we boot camped in China, it felt like I went 5 years into the future, because we got to see like the RNG arena. But now I don't know what's going on with RNG. I don't want to have that conversation. But we were at the RNG arena, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, is this the future? I don't know if it's financially responsible, but this is crazy what is going on over here. And the press conferences that we had, and just the facility that they had in Shanghai too was absolutely nuts. Like, and this was back in, when was it, 2018, and that was already like, I was in shock. I'm in shock every day. I'm not gonna lie. Like I am surprised that, just as you mentioned, in the span of 11 years, things have so rapidly gotten into something that is more real.
Yeah.
Because back in season 1 and 2, it was just a pipe dream. Like I was lucky that back in season 2, I got the rumor we're gonna create a league here in Europe, and everyone's gonna have a paid salary. And I was like, wow, money.
Yes.
Oh man.
It's fascinating, because back in the day when you were talking to like 17, 18-year-old kids, you're talking to their parents back in season, when I was in Brazil, so season 6. And even back in those days, it was really, really hard to explain that this wasn't a scam. Whereas now, you talk to 17-year-old kid, like when I talked to Jojo's parents, I didn't even need to explain what esports was to Jojo's parents. So he was like, oh, it's Faker, right? Like, because he has this, he has an ice cream brand, and things like this, because his parents were Korean, right? So they knew I didn't even have to pitch it, it was just like, this is what makes us different from another team, but it wasn't, this isn't a scam, right? And always the conversations I remember, until really recently, we're like, this is not a scam, just trust us, this is not, you really earn money doing this, so yeah.
No, that's amazing. That's actually amazing. Yes, it's funny that, like, the way I tied it into what you mentioned earlier, that it's like it went to that line of some players being estranged from their parents and having to like fight through that in order to become a pro player, create some kind of character. But now there's like an honest path to how to do and become something. Because I work with so many players that I had to run away from home to play in this team for no money, and then I climbed through the ranks, and now I'm at the LEC somehow. Like, that's a story. But now the story has changed in a way where there is a path to becoming a pro, which is a very stark contrast.
No, for sure. And, it's back in those days, you had to sacrifice something. Like, people don't realize, maybe so much, they think people come in, esports stars have easy and things like this, but no, back in season 1, season 2, you were literally like, it was succeed or, die. I don't want to be over dramatic, but succeed or like give up everything, right? Like people, you sacrifice your personal relationships, you sacrifice your financial opportunities, for what? For a chance to play in some tournament where, you get some food and maybe a little bit of money if you win. But it was like, it was really, really, really different back then. And, you can always see when you talk to people who were there in the original days, you can see the difference, right? Like the stories that you hear from people back in playing in season 1, season 2, Aranea, who's my GM, has a lot of very, very fun stories, which I'm not going to repeat on this show. But it's, you hear all kinds of things. Everyone has their own path, and I mean, you could immediately identify with somebody. It doesn't matter whether that path was in Brazil, whether that path was in China, whether that path was in Europe. We've all been through the same things, right? We've all seen the same stuff. Maybe it's in a slightly different venue or with slightly different circumstances, but nobody did it back in the day to be famous and wealthy. It was literally just the best at computer gaming, and or whatever game you played.
No, for sure, it was very, very rock and roll. many crazy stories that, as you mentioned, cannot be said publicly. Maybe in a couple of years, maybe in a couple of. Maybe a decade or two or something.
I've actually got one final question for you though, which is was looked down on compared to things like Dota and CS back in season 1, season 2?
I'm not. It's hard for me to say because I'm trying to think back of what information that I was digesting, and it was like I was mostly in League of Legends, and it wasn't so common for me to go on Reddit or something like this to kind of to go on Twitter either. It was just League of Legends forums, and then maybe the COG forums, and more often than not, you would just be tied to whatever area that you were in. At least in my case, so whatever StarCraft or Dota people were saying about League of Legends, I would never hear it because I wasn't really like a part of social media too much. It wasn't that big of a deal. Like Twitter accounts started popping up for everybody back in like season 3 because like sponsors were like, yeah, we need to make a Twitter. And it's like, what the fuck is this egg profile picture that I have? I'm just gonna leave it as is and move on. Like everyone was using Facebook, everyone was using the COG forums and the league forums, and that's kind of like an echo chamber of everyone just enjoying the game. Well, not enjoying, people were complaining just as much back then about things being broken, but complaining together is a pastime activity that everyone does within any a game, I guess. So I didn't necessarily notice. Like the big thing was always, the international. Look at that prize pool. Where's the League of Legends prize pool? And that was the main thing that you would hear. Look, like if I talked with friends, it's like, yeah, I'm competing at this IEM. It's like, yeah, but have you seen this Dota tournament with $1 million? Don't you want to win $1 million? I was like, yeah, that's how it works. I go there and then I pocket $1 million. That's how it works.
Yeah. It's just that easy, but I definitely think that definitely in the early days in China, like it was StarCraft, it was Dota, and League. It's really hard for me to track when League started becoming really, really serious. I mean, it was definitely there by season 2 Worlds, but it was somewhere there was some transition somewhere between season 1 and season 2 where people were like, yeah, this is something that we should really, really pay attention to. And obviously there were stars within the community, but it was, when did it start becoming mainstream? Okay, but that's interesting. What you mentioned about the West, because StarCraft obviously was first, and then everything kind of spread from there. So.
I feel like the league was very lucky with at least in the West. I'm not sure what happened in China and Korea for it to blow up as it did. But in the West, I feel like the creation of the direction that Justin TV went towards with their gaming section becoming so large and them opening up Twitch.tv, Own.tv, and having those strong personalities in COG and TSM and trying to capture that essence of streaming at the same time as the game was beginning to reach this apex in terms of the tournaments that were being created around it and the hype kind of being a catalyst for streaming at the same time. And I think it was just a perfect storm for League to become as big as it did, because the right personalities were playing the game and they were streaming the game. And then this was kind of the dream for everybody. Every player that was playing League was watching Dyrus or maybe Reginald or the Odd One and or the Rain Man you could mention, or the Hocho GG. So many cool names, like all of these OGs that had like a very clear personality that was good for the game, with the Bay Life Gaming House and so forth. It was just good content revolving around the game, and I think this was really big for the West, because it kind of created the dream in everyone's mind of, oh, I could make this into a career path. And then you have everyone wanting to become that streamer that they looked up to.
And also, I think the trash talk from back in those days, the trash talk was much less, how should we say this, much less politically correct, I would say.
For sure. I still have a print screen folder that I'm not going to deploy for my own amusement, but every name that everyone knows out there's a lot of ammunition, even ammunition of what I've said, so I am not fault-free on this. For sure.
Completely different world. Yeah, but I think that's one of the things. So League, is going through a little bit of a slump in North America. I've just come back from North America, mm-hmm. and I think that I think this is a bit what they lost, because back in the day you would watch your favorite streamers, and they would like Say Vicious. I'm just trying to think of some other people that you didn't mention as well. I remember Say Vicious was like, he was a big trash talker. People like obviously all the old TSM guys, Hotshot, Double Lift, obviously, all of those guys. You'd see them on their streams trash talking each other in solo queue, and then they come and make it real in their tournament and things like this. And then some of those guys went in and started owning teams and things like this. And then you watched the team of the person that you like to go and stream, and you see this sometimes in Europe. Like why are Solari so popular? Why are K-Corp so popular? Right? Like it's that kind of thing, right? And I sometimes miss a little bit. Obviously, the financial security is better and things like this. There's a lot of other things which are better, but you lost a little bit of like the raw passion that you got kind of in those early days. Now it's all you have to go through layers of committees. Is this thing okay? Hello, Mr. Marketing Firm employee. Is this? Are we allowed to present ourselves with this? This is off-brand, and it's all. It's very, very different. Is all I would say.
No, for sure. No, I think you're right on the point that I think that the idea of like legacy, like I think a lot of esports organizations try to kind of portray themselves as that legacy sports team, and I think that the majority of that fan base that is tied to like this idea of just being a fan of a team, I think that's usually like those fans are aligned with Fnatic and maybe G2, but then most of it, the current storm of it is just the content creators that are not necessarily tied to a specific game, because the content creators they have so much power. I think this is the only point where I've felt the word influencer is like a correct term, because they actually have a lot of influence rather than that Instagram person or whatever that calls themselves an influencer. But I think definitely we've gotten to that point where the content creators carry a lot of weight and power. I wanted to ask you, since you mentioned the LCS, the usual question, right? If the LCS, the obvious issues that everyone has mentioned, declining player base and the culture. Is there something that you feel has been unsaid about what's going on in LCS? And maybe is there something that should make people in North America hopeful?
I was going to say going to weekdays, but then they decided that they were going to compete with the E. Oh man. Okay, so there's a lot that's been said about it. One thing the teams were told a long time ago about this. One thing that was very impressive about Jackie is basically Jackie came to every single team, Jackie Felling, who's the commissioner, and basically answered all the concerns of all the staff and the players in person, making herself accountable. Right. And I'll be honest, sometimes when you work with players, they say things like, I don't want to come and meet this commissioner, but no, it was compulsory for all the teams. And I think at least 4, maybe 5 out of our 5 players came out of that meeting thinking, okay, right, there's some things to be hopeful here. I understand why these decisions are being made. And, I've never seen a commissioner come and do what she did. And then, so we knew that the move to weekdays was coming for months now. But then when the announcement is made, it's on the day before everyone goes on holiday. So there's no response to anyone from Riot. It's made it like a small announcement, and the start times are 12 o'clock. And the only reason you would start at 12 p.m. PST is to compete for European fans. Like there's literally zero reason why you would do that, and they put it on the same day as the Spanish and French league, right? Like there's literally no way that this is going to work. So I was hopeful a bit because I went to Korea this year, and I saw the weekday participation from Korean fans. Like you want to go and watch a team on week, all the tickets. They have 2 games. I can't remember exactly when they are, but I think it's like 5 to 7, 8 to 10. I've forgotten the exact times. It was a long time. It was quite a few months ago. But basically, those games all fill out. The arena is completely full out. You have to buy your tickets in advance. And why are they sold out? It's because on weekday evenings, people, you maybe don't want to spend 5 hours going and watching on your Saturday or your Sunday. But if it's the evening, I watch Champions League football on a Wednesday evening, on a Tuesday evening. There's no reason you want to that you can't do that. And for me, that was a reason to be optimistic. It was a reason to be optimistic. Okay, they're changing the schedule. This weekday audience, the league fan base is getting older. This is a way that parents can maybe watch with their kids. It's maybe, when I finish school or when I finish university, I'll come back, and this was a new way to gain audience. And then the only time slot that this is available for is for Europeans. And it's not even that because they've released the schedule, it's not even that the weaker teams are playing first to warm up, right? It's the teams that they think are the best teams are going to be playing on the first game, right? Which means if you want to watch first game in North America, it's 3 p.m. on the East Coast, 12 o'clock on the West Coast. So I have very, very little optimism. I feel really sad, but for all the reasons, I thought maybe this was a new opportunity. I'm sure that they have the data and this is what they've decided to do, but it just makes me a little bit sad, But other than that, there's reason to be optimistic. How they run their Champions queue, although Champions queue has issues. The new Challenger circuit, right? But it's not. These are not without the viewer base and without the fan base to back it up. It's going to be pretty hard. So that's all I would say from that. I don't want to be too negative about North America, but I've had tens of people reach out to me saying that I used to be a fan of this. Tell me something about European teams. Maybe I'm going to watch more LEC. Maybe I'm going to watch more ERLs. Who should I cheer for in Spain? Obviously, Heretics in Spain. The answer is always Heretics. But who should I cheer for in France? Who should I cheer for? Is the Italian league worth watching? Is the Polish league worth watching? And these are fans who used to watch the LCS back in the day. And now they can't anymore. So they're interested in what their other options are. And that kind of thing makes me sad. Right? And that's what I have to say about that.
No, that does make sense. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm not sure. On my end, when I saw the roster announcements for the North American teams, I have a lot of interest in watching the teams. Of course, on my end, the scheduling is it's better for me personally that the days are separated. So like I'm blessed, you know. Like if there's esports going on, league going on all the time, I'm very happy. Rock and roll, you know, on my end, that's not an issue. But in terms of the rosters that have been created, the return of Doublelift and Bjergsen together, the FlyQuest roster, the TL roster, I think even the Dignitas roster, maybe I'm forgetting one, the C9 roster too. Like there's a lot of genuinely exciting rosters for me to watch, and I feel like that's often what it comes down to as a viewer. I'm not sure how the metrics are impacted by VOD viewers or the timing of it. I can imagine that after watching a full day of LEC, that a lot of people are fatigued to watch another full day of LCS, and watching 10 hours of League of Legends is not really something that makes sense. So I understand that separation of trying to make the whole product more digestible for the viewer that isn't necessarily tied to a league, rather that viewer that wants to watch esports. So I'm not sure if their metrics are going to be pumped up just because they have more interesting teams coming into this year, and they're going to pat themselves on the back. Wow, the weekdays are so great. But I'm not sure how they kind of manage with... how do they manage their analytics with such a short time frame of testing? It's like there's so many variables at play, so I feel like it should be hard to have any major takeaways within the span of a split.
Yeah, I agree. I think they may also be gambling a little bit in that, you know, North American fans don't have that many other options. Because if you want to watch LPL or LCK live, you're staying up at 2 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. You know, LPL finishes sometimes 5 a.m. in the morning because, you know, I used to watch those games. And the you know, maybe you just don't have another choice. Maybe it's nothing. You watch the VODs afterwards, or you know, maybe they're anticipating, maybe they're going to do something with VODs, you know, make them more, maybe they're going to have highlight shows. I don't know exactly what they have planned. Nobody's told me that. But yeah, the rosters are definitely very, very interesting this year. And it's a year where apparently LCS cut budget a bit this year, which is interesting. So they managed to build, rosters. They managed to bring in, what was it? The MVP of the World's Final, although Kingdom was the MVP. But they managed to bring in a World Championship jungler. They brought in like Rookie of the Year. They brought in Prince. You know, they brought Prince Vikler. Like so many of these, fantastic players. It'd be really, really interesting to watch. Also, a lot of European players coming back, right? So Bwipo could have come back if rumors are to be believed. Hans Hammer's back in Europe, and you know, maybe this is a good thing as well. Well, we'll have to see. But definitely, you know, I'm interested to see how, because obviously Jojo is somebody who I like a lot, but obviously I'm interested to see how Jojo will match up against Vikler. Like that's the thing, or against Diplex, or against Eminez. You know, like those things are very, very interesting to me. So you know, it's great for me. I'm a European. You know, they change the time slot for my benefit. I'm not complaining. You know, I'm gonna have LVP up on one screen, and I'm gonna have LCS up on the other screen, and it's great. Living best life here. But you know, who knows what it will mean for the domestic viewer base? But yeah, should promises to be a bit very interesting. Who do you have as the strongest team coming out for LCS next year?
Like on my end, I think naturally I'm just going towards FlyQuest. Who do they have? They have Impact. I think that's already amazing. I think that's fantastic. Having Impact, Vikla, and then they have Prince. Their support player is who?
Let me just think. Oh man, it's gonna come to me. It used to be Alpha Movement, and they replaced it. Oh, it's Ayla. Okay, I just checked in the. I knew speaking was wrong, but it was Ayla. Interesting. Okay, that's interesting. Ayla was pretty good in Academy last year.
So my information is so limited when it comes to North America. I just remember Ayla when he subbed in for Mr. I didn't have my visa finished yet. And I thought he was completely, you know, fine. Like North America, it's like if I choose how to distribute my time, my priority is always go like LPL, LCK, like the big games, the big teams, Europe, and then it's like sometimes I even prioritize the ERLs before I go to North America before the big games. I don't understand how you do it, how you distribute your time. Like how does a day in the life of Peter Dunn look like in terms of time distribution?
My days last year were very, very unhealthy. That's all I would say for that. Normally, I have to sack one of the major leagues. So you know, when you have staff, I think it's valuable if you have different members of staff who are assigned to different leagues and who can get specialist knowledge of that league. And I'll be honest, like LCK, I'm pretty poor on LCK. I mean, I watch a bit prepping for Worlds and playoffs this year, but like normally it's another member of staff who is following all the LCK. I'm actually watching Vietnam. I watch Vietnam. I watch LPL. And then obviously NA and EU. But basically my days were kind of, you know, go home at 12, get 2 hours sleep, wake up, go and watch LPL, go to sleep, wake up again. It was very, very unhealthy, I think, what I was doing. I think a couple of my players told me that maybe I was pushing myself a bit too hard at times over the course of last year, and that maybe, you know, if I was a bit more awake because I was watching a bit fewer games, maybe it would be more helpful. But I think that, you know, I want to watch. The reason why I tend to watch leagues that people value a little bit lower is I want to see things that can surprise me. You know,
Yeah,
I want to
see the outliers.
Exactly, right. Like I want to see. I want to see a Xerath mid game. I want to see, like it was really funny because the meta game in I remember the spring meta game in the UK ERL was decided because Xerath was picked, I think, into Ziggs. I remember, I think it was either in spring or summer last year. A lot of these things obviously haze together. But the meta was Ziggs was, for some reason, really, really important in that series. And then Xerath, the team that won, had Xerath into Ziggs, and the other team didn't have an answer to it. And you know, it's things like this which get you thinking, and that's kind of what that's kind of what I like to see. Now, obviously, you know, you see this a little bit now. You know, with we saw Heimerdinger being a major pick for Beryl at Worlds, and there's all kinds of things which are apparently counts into Heimerdinger, like Jhin support. You know, Scrim start tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to see how many people are going to pull out Jhin support. But you know, it's always, this is, I think, one of the reasons. Like for me, one of the reasons that I kind of found historically, although, you know, things have changed over the last year, maybe year and a half. I have an idea of what the correct way to play League of Legends is, and I don't need to see another game of historic SKT, you know, just ticking all the boxes and playing perfect macro League of Legends every single game, perfect vision control, perfect vision denial, you know, good setups. You know, I can watch it 5 times, 10 times, and that's useful for me, but there's no point watching it 100 times, right? So I like the more chaotic games, and that's why I've gravitated more towards the leagues that play a little bit more chaotic, and that having that interest, you know, that I'm going to tune in and I'm going to watch a Clown Fiesta, and I'm going to try to reverse engineer, if I was coaching one of these teams, how I would go about handling our team review or a breakdown of how this game went. That's the thing that interests me, right? So that's what keeps me watching all of these games. It's not to establish perfection. It's to see teams do weird stuff and try to work out how I would respond to that.
I think that makes sense. Yeah, I think in general, I think what's lost upon a lot of people is that they lose kind of their beginner's mind. It's like in essence, when you are we establish biases very easily depending on what we watch and what we play, and getting stuck in our ways can be very dangerous. Because exactly as you mentioned, like when the Heimerdinger support comes out, it's like it's something that has been staring us in the face for a long time. There's a lot of those guys in solo queue that just play Heimerdinger support, and I know my players and they say, this guy is trolling me, he's playing Heimerdinger support, it's so useless. And then the right person needs to play it, and then all of a sudden it's, wow, it's so OP. And I think exposing yourself to different ideas is so important to challenge your own, as also to explore new ideas. So I definitely can relate to your process there for sure.
Like, I'm on the same page for this, but also it's about people playing champions in new ways. And I think that one example of this is, Impact obviously was a really good Shen player. But one thing, it wasn't that big in Europe, but in North America, there was a time where everyone was playing Flash Smite top, like Janna and things like this. And I remember Impact is like, oh, they're playing Flash Smite top. Why can't we just do this with Shen? And I'm going to sit on Berserker's tower for 2 minutes because we were screaming C9 that day, and we're literally going to just dive bot lane 3 times, and to paraphrase, screw playing all of this Smite top Jan, I'm going to play Shen and I'm going to play Poppy, and we're just going to dive bot, and this is how we're going to play Smite top. We're going to make the enemy AD carry really, really, really dislike it his time, and that was kind of our answer, because obviously this was C9 back in the LS time, so they were doing all kinds of weird enchanter stuff all over the map. And our answer was just, okay, right, you play all the enchanters you want, and we're just going to play 2 lanes from 3 minutes in, and we're just going to dive your bot lane, and then good luck with all of your enchanters. But coming up with that solution was only a solution because of how weird the internal metagame, I think, was in those scripts. Because obviously, so it's just sometimes the information is staring you in your face, and sometimes once people start playing those things against you, then only do you start to see the responses. Right? But it takes one team being a bit more creative and a bit more inventive to expand everyone's horizons.
No, for sure. I think a good example of that is also, I remember 2018, I believe it was 2018, we were boot camping in China. We came back, and all of a sudden Reckless is playing Janna, Karma, and then one team is funneling, and then there was just this, for me, this was some of the most exciting times, because it's really, it became so easy to convince the players to try something very new, and to expose them to something that is different, just in the context of how strange the game was. It's like we had G2 that was only playing this funnel meta with the Talia, Alistar, with the brand bot full AP team, but it somehow worked. And then you had the bot laners that refuse to play AD carries, and they're just playing all the Swains and the Vladimirs and the Ryze, and all of a sudden, the game was League of Legends 2.0. And for me, those times are so fun, because it allows you to really show depth in a new way.
I remember you guys were just murdering us because you'd go and pick Ziggs GP or Lux GP or something like this, and then our AD carry couldn't play the game, and I remember there were all kinds of variations. That was 2018 summer. I remember it being, because 2018 spring was pretty standard, but 2018 summer was absolutely crazy. It was Heimerdingers, it was funnels, it was, oh man.
It was good times. Yeah. It was good times. Speaking of good times, you moved from INTZ into Splyce initially, right? I remember this correctly. Yeah. But the first initial Splyce roster, when I think of that roster, it doesn't strike me as a Peter Dunn roster. What was your input? What was your move into the LEC the first time? What was your role? Splyce came to you. They say, we need this man on the team. What was that definition?
So we have lots of things like non-disclosure agreements and things like this on various teams, but Splyce didn't make me sign Splyce have never made me sign a non-disparagement clause or non-disclosure agreement or things like this. So I'm free to flame Splyce all I want. But it's worth saying that even though I've been free to flame Splyce as much as I want, I've never done it because Marty at heart, I think Marty was a good person, but I think that maybe there were things that. There were people within Splyce that maybe took advantage of that to do things in their own way. Because basically, when I joined Splyce, Splyce told me the roster, the manager, the GM of Splyce came to me and said, the roster that you will have is Mickey, Kobe, Trashy, Senkooks, and Wonder, right? And that is going to be your roster. And then I was like, oh, that sounds like a pretty good roster. You know, it's a roster that was well. It's a roster that obviously you work with. And it was like, okay, can I speak to some of these players? I'm really curious about, you know, why they decided to keep playing together and things like this. And then it's like, no, you're on another team. You know, you have to sign this contract first. Before you become a total players. So I was like, oh, okay, fine. It seems like this is the way. And I spoke to Martin and I was like, you know, your GM's come and told me this. You know, is there a problem with this? And Martin was like, oh no. You know, the players are all great guys. There's no way that this would go in any other way. And I joined Splyce, and then I spoke to the players, and they were like, "We're never playing together ever again." There were 2 players on that team who I'm not going to repeat, who were basically like, "We haven't talked to each other since the end of the year, and we are never talking to each other." I was like, "Holy moly, what have I let myself in for?" and obviously, like, I mean, I think Wonder was always going to go to G2 and things like this. Yeah, but like it was I mean that was really, really scrambling. And I think there was one point in the off season where it was like, okay, let's just go full rookie and build around this one person. And obviously at that time, I'd been in Brazil for 2 years and done the rookie thing once in Brazil. But you know, I can understand why a GM or like a team owner or something like this might turn around and say, no, we're not going rookies now, right? Like, you know, this is Europe, come in and learn Europe better. Yeah. And so it was a case of, yeah, well, we're not going rookies, like build what you can. You know, we had some nice starting pieces. You know, Kobe and Kasing wanted to play together. And this was before everything went crazy in 2018 spring. It was just after Ardent Sensor, right? It was literally the that was Ardent Sensor. I remember it because it really fucked us in Brazil. The patch, they introduced it just before playoffs, and we were like, yeah. But basically so I was like, okay, I have Kasing, who's a really, really good Ardent Sensor player. I have Kobe, who's a really good team fighting AD carry. Let's see what we can build around this. So the team was built with that in mind. And once you know that you have those guys, then obviously like Xerxes and Niski become obvious, and then our top laner, I think we lucked out a bit with Odo that year, because I think Odo was, the rumors were that Odo was going to North America. Obviously now that was just some internet account had just made that up, but it meant that he was available. So we got him. We were looking at a wide range of options in that offseason. Like every top laner you can possibly imagine was being looked at. Even like, you know, people like I don't know who I can really talk about, but a wide range of rosters were offered, and it was more a case of, okay, this is the situation I'm in now. I've committed to the situation. Let's go and see if we can make the best of it. And yeah, and then since then it's always been about tweaking, right? I think I think that the one thing is always you have specialists. I think that it's not just about rookies. It's about you have specialists in your team, and how do you build around, like, you have non-moving points, and how do you build around those non-moving points? And I think for that Splyce roster, it was the non-moving points were Xerxes and Kobe. So and put the best team around those guys, knowing that those are the 2 points. But at the time, I didn't know Xerxes that well. Like, I didn't know him as a human being that well. I just knew him. He was the guy who was on Dark Passage with Caps, and who actually I thought was better than Caps. He was obviously has developed a lot back in the day, but when they were both 16, they were on Dark Passage, and I was here in Europe on INTC camping in Europe, and I remember their mid jungle were really, really, their mid laner was a complete psychopath. Obviously, Caps later, but their jungler was incredibly smart, and I didn't actually realize that was Xerxes at the time, and I didn't realize he was 16. And when I found that out later, and then I realized that was Xerxes, I was like, there's definitely something very interesting. So yeah, so that's kind of how that team was built. It didn't adapt very well to the change in meta, because it was a very specialized team that was designed to win the game in one specific way. And when everything went crazy, we had to adapt, and I think we were slow to adapt. And we had a very, very poor regular season in summer, but by playoffs we kind of found our way. But I think it was a little bit too late. But yeah, maybe if G2 weren't there I think G2 were always going to be there in the lower bracket. But maybe if I don't Heimerdinger to YamatoCannon twice, we can win that series because we were 2-1. We were 2-1 down.
To bring up old wounds,
Yeah, I mentioned this to Jankos. Sorry, the last thing on that. I mentioned this to Jankos because we thought we could play in Heimerdinger. In game 4, we just got murdered by it. But in game 5, we had like a very specific counter, and our counter was working, and we were winning the game. And then Jankos did some really crazy pathing to swing the entire game. And when Jankos joined Heretics, I mentioned it to him, and he was like, "Yeah, I don't remember that at all." And then it's a joke, "Oh, that was just for you, that was like you guys getting knocked out of Worlds, but for me, that was just like a Sunday," which I appreciated that.
That's Jankos for you. The man is a gangster. I wanted to ask you: do you think G2 made a mistake? Well, I go Jankos. Of course, you have to kind of say it.
Look, this is the best possible team for Yike. So we scouted Yike. Yike's on G2 now. There's no way that. But basically, what I would say about Yike is that Yike got a lot better this year because he went from playing with mid laners who basically didn't know how to win the game to playing with Ica. And you talk to anyone about that team, and they will always say how important Ica was. And Ica's a bit of a meme because he didn't have so much of a successful time in North America. But everyone in the French scene knows how good this guy is. And maybe he's gonna struggle to get LEC offers, but this is a guy who knows how to win games. He knows how to micromanage his teammates. And Yike looked very, very good as a result of that. Now, is Yike bad? No, Yike's not bad. And on G2, he's going to have Caps who is not as good as Ica is, somebody who can teach him the fundamentals of playing the game. So that's a good fit for him. But obviously, you don't drop Jankos with. I mean, you have to make very, very. I have lots of insight on this, so I have to be careful. All I would say on this is it's not a decision you take lightly, right?
Yes.
Obviously, it works out to Heretics' benefit, but I think that Yike is going to have to grow a lot. And let's be clear, on that team, there are a lot of very popular players on G2, and whenever they lose any game, so maybe they just win all the games, win all the championships, and everything is free, and Yike turns into the best player you can possibly imagine. But every single time they lose, we all know who's going to get blamed, right? So that's all I would say about that. So I hope they look out for him. And there's a lot of veterans on that team, and I hope that those veterans, shield for their rookie, right? That's all.
Okay. I also wanted to ask you about their top laner. I'm a big fan of Evie. I like him a lot. I like his character, and I know that this guy is an OG that's been around since forever. Has it been any different for you to integrate a Japanese player over some of the other regions? Because this is new, right? Importing a Japanese player, this is the first one. What has been different in your experience, or is Evi just that experience that is just a natural born, adapter and leader?
So what would I say about Evie? Evie is, whenever you import somebody who is not fluent in the local language of the region that you are importing into, you are taking a massive risk. Right? Let's not beat around the bush here. You are taking a massive risk. That means it's very important that you do the due diligence, not just on. You don't just do the due diligence on their play skill. You do the due diligence on their what they're like as a human being, right? How are they going to adapt? This is something. Exactly, the character, and also you have to bear in mind that things like they're also going to be a long way away from family. They're going to be away from family. They're going to be away from friends. They're going to be in a new environment. And, sometimes people that don't have that much life experience, it's very, very hard for somebody who is not like a perfect culture fit to come in and hit the ground running, right? And I think that sometimes you see examples of this where people have managed to hit the ground running, like Huni, good example, Berserker, good example. But when you're bringing in somebody from a different environment, you have to be very important and take due diligence about that. So I would say that Evius I respected for a long time, but is somebody that he's being picked not just because of his play skill, but because of how he's going to adapt. How he's going to adapt to the new environment. And all I would say is that he comes from a family. Everyone in his family, as far as I can tell, is fluent in English. He's not, but he basically put himself in isolated English training right before the boot camp. It was basically a month where he didn't speak much Japanese off screen, as far as I can tell, and he came in with a decent level of English. And I expect similar things from this season. And him and Jankos, they joke, they like to joke together, and he finds some things about English very interesting, especially slang and turns of phrases. But in game, there's no issue, and out of game, obviously, he has to keep going, but he's made good steps so far. But in terms of his play style, he is a very, very, very player. He's a guy that people who watch national league, people like you, people like. I don't want to call out other names of people who may have vouched for this guy as well. But people who've scrimmed DFM international tournaments all know how good this guy is.
Yeah.
He's always fantastic in scrims. He's always good on stage. And in Japan, sometimes he has happy games, but let's be honest, DFM is so far ahead of everyone else in Japan that sometimes it must be hard to keep your 100% motivation focused every game, right? But whenever it's mattered, things have been. He's been good, and you can see how big of a deal he was in Japan, because as soon as he leaves, Sengoku Gaming, who are probably the second best team in Japan after DFM, go hard. They go oh yes, Evi's gone. He's not on DFM anymore. We can win now. They go hard on they bring in Reaper. They bring in not top Koreans, but pretty decent Koreans as well. And they're like, yes, here's our chance. And I think I wonder if that investment happens if Evi is still on DFM. And I think that's the best vouching for him that I can possibly think of.
The man has a special place in my heart because he won against you guys. His Nar was a heart stopper with the Yumi on him. He was going crazy in that game, and I remember I think trying to remember back. I remember him. Maybe I'm crazy, but I remember him playing at an All Stars, and I remember at this All Stars he was playing out of his mind, and I was so impressed because Yuzuki was at the same All Stars, and I was just mind blown by how good this guy is. And I'm very happy that he's in Europe. I'm very excited to see him play. It's interesting because now on the other end, not on the other end, but in the mid lane, you have Ruby, who's also a player that I remember back in 2018. He was the sub for Afrika, and this was just around the corner when Irelia was reworked. He played it. And I've never seen someone do so crazy things. And then next day we ban Irelia, and then mechanically this guy was just mind-blowing. And I was just in shock that this is a player that is sitting on the bench. And I was just thinking, just sub this guy in, Mowgli, just play with him, Ruby, and now he's been playing in Europe for a full year. Is it the full year that he has been playing in Europe?
He's been a full year. What I'd say about Ruby is I think that first he was ranked he's still ranked pretty highly in Korea now, but he's not. He back in that time was when he got imported into LPL, I think, and he was imported into LPL basically because he was consistently top 10 in Korea for
yes.
He then after the LPL situation is I'm not going for that, but then he was in PCS, and then PCS went remote, and he was playing a Thai team in PCS on 100 ping against the Taiwan teams playing on 5 ping. The way that they handled ping in PCS playoffs is fascinating. If you were ranked higher in regular season, you got ping selection. You got to pick which server the game was played in games 1, 3, and 5. And then the other team got choice of 2 and 4, right? So they lost 3-2 because the other team got to play on 5 ping for 3 games. And they only got to play on 5 ping for 2 games. And versus like it was 100 plus ping in a competitive game. You know,
Okay.
So I sympathize with the PCS, but he had a bit of a rough time for that. Yeah, and then he's been in Europe. The one thing that I say about Ruby, same thing as I said about Evie, the marks of your character are important. And obviously Ruby has strong mechanics, but the main thing about Ruby is he came to Unicorn to Love and he couldn't speak English, or basically very, very little English. And they asked him if he wanted a translator or he wanted a Korean teammate or something like this, you know, something to work with. And he basically said, no, you know, I'm here. You know, he didn't say anything about LCK, but, you know, his age, we all know that after a certain age, you can't go to LCK anymore. And LPL, but let's skip that. But LEC, you know, like he wants to go to Worlds, right? And one of the things that I would say is he loves hearing every story, because obviously every's been to every single international event, and so Jankos. And basically he wants that for himself, and he realized that if he was in the ERLs, if he wanted to play in the LEC, he needed to be fluent in English, and he wanted to force himself out of his comfort zone. And I'm going to be honest. Ruby's English is better than like Impact's English. It's better than like many European players. Like I've played with some Polish players and some other players where English is not like the first language, and he's better at English than many of those guys. Like even some French players. And that's because he pushed himself through it for the entire year. And for me, that shows character. We'll see how he does on the mechanical side. Obviously, there's a big. He looked good in ERLs, but it's easier to look good against ERL mid laners than it is to look good against Caps, Humanoid, and Larsen, right? Like, yes. I mean, like let's be clear. In Europe, if you want to go to World, you have to beat Caps, Humanoid, or Larsen unless EU gets more seats. No? Sure. Can you still hear me?
Actually, yeah.
Okay. So I don't know if So basically, yeah. So hopefully EU gets a 4th seed, but basically. Yeah, again, nobody goes to Worlds without beating one of those guys, and he's been able to demonstrate that he can, and I have full faith in him. But you know, he has to show it on stage, right? And he's got the team around him to be able to succeed. So.
That's exciting. I wanted to ask you as well. I think when it comes to the ideas of rookies, I feel like often it's misunderstood by GMs. I think. Sometimes GMs are pushing in the direction of rookies because they romanticize the idea of, wow, this player is going to come in and then become the best player in his position right away, which is insanely rare. And I think that the mistakes that occur often is either in terms of pushing out the wrong players that have reached a veteranship that should be respected, or not giving players the right players around them and not the right amount of time because they haven't made a crazy jump into stardom instantly as they expected in their mind. In the context of Mersa, I wanted to ask you this question, maybe outside the context of Mersa. How do you, as yourself, define when a player requires more time, or where do you find those? Where do you draw the line of a player that has gotten his shot, or a player that should be developed more into a strong veteran that is one of those names that is, of course, echoed in the halls of legacy in European League of Legends, as an example?
Mm-hmm. Yamato, just quickly check. I noticed that your chat on Twitch is talking about the internet connection. So maybe it's better if I turn off my.
Yeah. Maybe go for it. Try it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, guys. I'm in a hotel now, so it's not the best. But hopefully, without taking up some bandwidth. But what I would say on this is that. I think veterancy is underrated to an extent, but I think that what people have to realize is that the veterans that you have in your team they have more expectations on them, and it's not just about their behavior in game. And I think sometimes, if you're a rookie, you come in because you're not expected to lead. You're not expected to be the person who is going to carry the team outside of the game. You just have to play the best that you can possibly play. And sometimes, people come in and then they are a star for the team, and they're still a really good player, right, in the league. And then they question, okay, I'm like one of the best players in the league, but maybe I'm not being rated or valued as highly. Why is that? And I just need to be better, right, at my role. But the problem is that's a little bit of a misnomer in my opinion, right? Because let's say you come into a team and there's a team that has a mix of rookies or veterans. The veterans get to set the culture and get to set the rules for how the team interacts with each other. And this is a coach can have some influence, right? But at the end of the day, if you have a team full of veterans that just flame the rookies all the time and want to make their life really, really hell, they can do it. And you only get to be there with the team in scrims, right? You're not there all of the time as a coach. And this matters more. The better a player you are and the more of a star player you are, it's not just enough to be a star player. You have to be like a leader, and you have to be a veteran for the team, right? So for me, I think that when you're working with veterans, what matters is the content of their character first. And play skill matters. I'm not saying that play skill doesn't matter. You shouldn't just hire like a player who's 6 out of 10 and put a player who's 9 out of 10 on the bench because the 6 out of 10 is a nice guy and the 9 out of 10 is a bit toxic. But you have to realize that if you have like a 9 out of 10 star player who's very, very toxic and that guy's a rookie, that's perfectly fine, right? The veterans on the team are just going to go shut the fuck up, right? Like if that guy tries to be too mouthy, or they, it's more handleable because the veteran on your team is going to then go and, maybe let's say you have an AD carry and the AD carry is being really mean to the support, not mentioning anyone specifically, but let's say you have a jungler who's a veteran on your team. The jungler can put his arm around that guy's shoulder and say, look, yes, today was a rough day in scrims, but let's talk about how things can be better tomorrow. Let's go and put in some additional time. Let's go and watch some VODs together, right?
No, for sure.
But if that AD carry is the veteran on your team and the star player on your team, and he starts flaming that support, who's going to look after that support, right? Like, let's say you have double lift, right? Let's say you have double lift, and double lift is being really, really harsh to Bucio on a team that doesn't have Bjergsen. Who is going to stand up to double lift and say, cut it out, right? I mean, on a team like on 100 Thieves, it shouldn't happen because they have Bjergsen who can probably do a little bit of that. But that's, I think, a little bit kind of my philosophy. And I think also with rookies, so that's on the veteran side. Like, you have to me as a veteran, there's expectations on you to provide more, right? And it's outside of the game as well. And obviously you get more with that. You get more responsibilities. You get hopefully larger paycheck. You get like other things as well that justify what you're contributing, right? But in terms of how the team balance, unless you have a team, mixing veterans and rookies is often quite difficult in teams where you don't have the right veterans around them, and sometimes it's better rather than bringing up a hype rookie to have another veteran to handle that kind of frustrations or that kind of stress and things like this. In terms of rookies, yeah, obviously you have to put a rookie in an environment where they can succeed, and yeah, that's always been my philosophy, right? If you either have a team full of rookies like that you've worked with before, obviously back in the Splyce days when all of those guys were rookies, and then they have to figure things out themselves, or you have a team that has veterans that will play to those rookie strengths. You look at a player like Jojo. What is Jojo? Jojo is a facilitating mid laner that has good mechanics, right? So he's not like a god team fighting mid laner. He's somebody that's very good at playing with his jungler. So you need to have a jungler that can take advantage of this, right? Inspired, right? Just to give an example from the EG example. Or you have a team where the veterans have very specific leadership fundamentals where you could just put any rookie around them and they'll look after those rookies. There's players I can mention, but I don't know if they're comfortable to be typecast in that kind of way, so I'm not going to mention it. But there's some very obvious players in the scene who are very good at working on teams with rookies. And then finally, you just have a team full of veterans, and when you have a team full of veterans, your job as a coach is essentially to make sure that they behave in an appropriate way towards each other, and they come up with the solutions themselves. And I think those are the different types of teams you can have. And yeah, so essentially, I agree with basically what you were saying before.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. That's also something that is missed often. At least my impression over the methodology of how some GMs operate is that they believe that performance between teams is very easily transferable. And I believe often, of course, performance is always contextual to what the game is, to what teammates they have around themselves, and also the environment. Some things for sure are very transferable, but how you achieve your highs as a player is always also very contextual to a situation. In some teams, it might be easier for you to perform. In some teams, it might be a lot harder for you to perform. And I think this is what makes these legacy players, the legendary players that have performed in different alterations and different rosters, even more impressive, because this is always the challenge of how you operate in different dynamics. But I think often it's like, oh, this player performed really well last year. Okay, we're going to bring him to our team and he's going to perform exactly the same as he did last year in our team. And we're going to become so much better due to it. And I think that's something that is often missed. But I think a lot of details you find in the character of players and in just the way they talk about general things. It's like often my first initial step is always, as yourself, is just have a conversation with a player, because you learn so much about how they could potentially perceive situations or even perceive themselves. I think that's also important to explore. Which for me, when I thought of this topic because of Mersa, and I saw some of the conversations surrounding Mersa, which was very surprising to me. I think Mersa had a lot of good moments on a Misfits that did plenty of good, and I think in essence, I think a lot of the credit always went to VT over what happened in Misfits, but I think that's also quite unfair, because in my mind, I think that there was a solid cooperation around what Misfits wanted to achieve and how they hid their weaknesses, and I think that Mersa was an important part of that. I remember his Amumus and his Leonas doing crazy shit.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree. Like, he's the person. So was Zlatan rookie of the split? He was right in spring. Or was he second?
He might have been, yeah. But I also remember that there was not that many candidates that year. Yeah. But Zlatan was the least in one trick, is what I remember him as. It's very vague.
What I would say is that, like, one of the reasons why Zlatan was able to have as much freedom as he was able to have is because Mersa was there to, like, pick the champions, for the team, or to like be there to cover, or to be there to be primary engaged, right? And I think that that's something that was overlooked. Just to quickly double back there on your last point about culture. Just put people. Cultures are really like a ephemeral term, right? Like, it can mean anything. But to give like a more concrete example of this, like maybe you have a team where 3 players on your team heavily value grinding, and like 2 players on your team don't grind that much, right? Mm-hmm. Then you have like a culture clash there, and like, when things start to go bad, maybe the grinders start blaming the people that aren't grinding, or things like this, right? So you have like that's kind of an example of a very basic example of how things can go wrong. Also things like where you have a team where some players benefit more from a more strict and like direct type of feedback, whereas others don't, right? So that's just another example. Like, there's many different examples. But yeah, to back to the Mersa point, I think that Mersa, people forget how quickly Mersa came out of nowhere, right? He was on sub up. He then he got promoted, and then he was kind of tossed in LEC like directly. And I think there's a lot of gaps kind of in his macro knowledge that he never really had the chance to develop. And sometimes you can be like in Yo-Yo, and you can come in and those things come to you naturally, right? But I would say in the vast majority of cases, it's not like this. And when I see in this off season people saying about Mersa, oh, just throw this guy away, he's useless and things like that, it really is puzzling to me, because they don't fully properly understand the context, And even if this was a player who, played in the LFL or something for 4 years and then came to LEC, he would still be worth a second go. But this is not somebody who has like 4 years or 3 years in like a major ERL. He literally came up from solo queue, and this is why I think when I've talked about this, I think it's important that people give him time to develop in the same way that they give Jack time to develop. Now, somebody like Evie, somebody like Ruby, they should know their stuff already, right? So there's no problem. I'm not saying go and flame those players, but I'm saying that it's not the same, right? With Meta. And yeah, my expectations for him are like.
I think like on the flip side, like the opposite example would be Rux. I think Rux is, of course, I think he belongs in the LEC, and I think he's a good fit for what Fnatic, the rest of the roster kind of needs. They need someone to kind of, to push them in like we definitely like lacked leadership within the team while they were in the game and also outside of the game, right? That often had to come from me, but it isn't the best place to come from, in essence, because I don't play the game, right? And I think that's a good fit. But at the same point, Rux played 2 games at the World Championship, 2 fantastic games. And that context is also used to paint a very, very wide picture of, at least publicly, in terms of what the conversation is within the fandom, is they are only watching those 2 games and deriving the whole context of Rux based on those 2 games. So it goes both ways, that the memory of the fans is always so limited and so short term. And like I can think of players as well. Like in my mind, I think Trimby has turned out to be a fantastic, like really, really strong player. Arguably the strongest support in Europe based on the performance of last year. And there was a time where Rogue was struggling and Trimby was still a part of those rosters. And Trimby was given that time, and he has gotten stronger and stronger as a player. And I think that context is very important to remember, especially for those roles that definitely, in my opinion, junglers and supports that tend to play for longer tend to become better and better. I think time definitely helps in those positions more so than maybe in the others. But at the same time, the more and more I think about it, I think time helps any role. So maybe this is not the best thing to say.
I fully agree. And since we're talking about Koi, like Sygenda is another perfect example, right? Like I see a lot of fans like insulting Szygenda, but like let's remember how Szygenda was in the LEC, right? Like Szygenda came into the LEC, he played with a sub mid laner who was playing LFL and LEC at the same time, right? Was scapegoated for basically what happened in spring when it just wasn't his fault. And went down to LFL, started playing well in LFL, and then they brought him up and rotated him with SLT like in summer. And I'm just sitting there thinking, if you are a fan and you're watching this guy, how can you possibly judge how good this guy is based on like on that year, right? No, so even if you've had a bad year, I think that's something that is you deserve a good a do-over in such a situation. And also, if you play well, just because we talked about this with Yike, again, I don't want to say Yike is a bad player. Yike is mechanically a fantastic player who does a very, very good job for his team, and he's going to be good on G2, right? But like, if you were putting Yike with rookie mid laner, it would be very different from if you're putting Yike with Caps, right? Or Yike with a more vocal leading, like you could put Yike with Niski would probably be pretty good, right? Like but there's some mid laners who are maybe less vocal who he probably wouldn't play that well with, right? And that's a example in the other direction, right?
No, for sure. Another layer that I wanted to ask is because I read your interview and you mentioned you need to have like, I don't want to misquote you, so I'm going to paraphrase you, is you need to have players that are willing to do the dirty work. And I think it is in every game that is super important, because there's always going to be someone that is going to have the short stick. In essence, what I'm trying to get at is, are you ever concerned with putting yourself in a position where you might not be viable in a certain meta, or is this a secondary thought? Or do you think that you can enforce the same patterns regardless of meta?
So in League, different people have to do different, like, it's not just enough to own. So I mentioned Makalele in that because in football, the rules don't change, right? So you can just be a defensive midfielder specialist and spend your entire life doing that, right? But you have to develop some kind of flexibility and that kind of flexibility over time. I mean, you can see the costs from this, right? Which is, again, 2018 Splyce, very, very specialized team.
Yes.
But when the meta changed, it was awful for us, right? And it took us a long time to come and adapt to the meta and find new ways to come and play the game. And I think I kind of learned a lot from that 2018 experience. But what I would say is, so yes, you need to adapt, right? In League, if you could only play one style, basically, it's really, really rough for you. Just look at how the Shy plays. The Shy, incredibly mechanically, like one of the best mechanical players in the world for many years in a row. But the meta, and when the meta is for him, can be the best player at the World Championships. Not the MVP, the best player, but slightly different thing. But when the meta is bad for him, it's kind of rough. But he's still a good player. He's still a solid player in the LPL. But you just have to work around his strengths and weaknesses. But I think it's also worth saying that if you typecast people too much in the League of Legends context, then it can be very, very mentally difficult for them. And I think the only reason I mention this is because Rome has come out publicly and said himself, but there was one season where there was a lot when I went on some shows and I said, I'd rather have a Rome than Alfari, and it became a little bit of a meme for a lot of things because I'd always mention that. But why was it important to mention this? It was because Rome was basically doing the dirty job, the dirty work for that Mad Lions team.
Yes.
And if you're a rookie doing that, and always you look bad every single game because you're playing weak side. You your teammates get to like have pop off games, and every single time you're going 5 CS less bad in the Maokai versus Now matchup than like some other Maokai is doing. Nobody notices it.
Yes.
And I think that it's important for teams to look out for people and recognize, because fans aren't going to see it. Fans aren't going to see when somebody is playing weak side well or doing the dirty job, unless you're literally, your identity in your career is like that, right? Which ironically goes in the opposite direction, because Impact has a reputation of being a god weak side player, whereas he's not bad strong side, but it could go in the other direction as well. But yeah, I think that it's important that you look out for people that do this, and but again, sorry to just I've sidetracked. To go back to your original question, specialists are good, but the way that Riot seems to want League of Legends to play, not as good anymore. Although I will say that the meta has been pretty stagnant for the last year and a half, right?
That's fair. That's fair.
It's very dragon focused, so maybe it's okay. Maybe it's okay again, because for the first 6 or 7 years, 6 years of League, the meta was very, very, very stable. Sometimes you'd have like Darius and Mordekaiser top being so broken, beyond like a GP top being so broken for a single worlds patch. But the meta was generally very, very similar. Then season 8, season 9, season 10, things were very, very much in flux. There was a lot of different things you can do. And then season 11, season 12 have like gone back to being a bit uniform. So maybe specialists when it comes to team building can function better. But just as somebody who like has a say in building teams, that's not something. The experience of season 8 has kind of like shifted me away from that.
Okay. No, that makes sense. I just wanted to ask because it seems like we are very much on the same page. It's like usually in my mind, roles often what I find myself doing is that roles become defined within the context of what the meta requires. And then eventually you need to ask yourself, are you going to expose yourself to the additional risk by trying to do something different in order to maybe fall and then to climb higher? Or are you going to just band-aid what you know works and then continue with it all the way? Because this was kind of our story this year with Heretics, especially in summer, where we were always with our backs against the wall and we needed to just lean into whatever would get us wins. And often that was Wunder being our guy that does the dirty work. He's going to get dove against 3 people with Gragas, and he's going to try to make the most out of it, or play matchups that are worse, because we struggled when he wasn't playing champions that were self-sufficient and at the same time provided us with tools to fight around Drake. So in essence, whenever we tried to play the Fiora, it wasn't necessarily the Fiora player that was at fault. It was just, as a team, we didn't really, explore the labyrinth that is how to play with a top side that is going to be dominant, which is something that a lot of EU teams stray away from, and usually it bites us in the ass when we come to the World Championship. But definitely, that's an internal conversation I always have with myself. Should I expose my players to new ideas, or do we need to think about the short term? Which leads me to the next question. In terms of the LEC scheduling, how has your approach changed, or if at all, in terms of how the new the schedule is, and how, of course, the new system is? Is there anything that has changed in your approach, or is it... Of course, if it's shush, then you don't need to tell me, but I'm curious.
It's awful. Actually, so... Okay, Yamato, just on your last point, from the last question, before we go to this one. I'm not going to... I'm observing you very closely on that webcam, but I obviously don't comment on this. I wouldn't want to put you in a difficult situation. But it's worth saying that there's no team in his career where Upset has played weak side, right? And has been a really effective weak side player. He's always been a very good strong side player, and that's no doubt played into your decision making on this. I just leave that there. I don't comment any further about this, but again, Upset very good, and what he does. Okay, going to the next point. I mean, all I would say for this is, no, I mean, this is the 3-day schedule is obviously awful for us. I really, really strongly dislike it. It was something that was done in North America.
Super weeks are tough, man. I hate super weeks. I leave super weeks tired as fuck every time. So God bless you, Peter.
I mean, I hate it. The feedback that we gave people in North America was, if you're going to have 3 days of games, have it so that a team plays twice on one day and once on a different day. Right? So don't have them play one game, and that's just... It's the worst of the worst. So the only thing that I would say that is different is maybe, there's less time for scrims, so maybe there's more scrims that are done on the days of games. That's what I would say for that. But no, it's something that we've experienced before. It just means that the boot camps preseason have to be longer, and when you're in, it's very hard to innovate once you're in the season already, because you only have 3 days of scrims, and one of those can easily be just a bad day. It can just go to shit.
Yeah.
Who knows? Somebody woke up on the wrong bed, the wrong side, or your coaches are just have a completely wrong read of the meta, right? Or something like this. You can just lose days. And if you have 1 or 2 days of valuable scrims a week, then it's going to be really, really rough. So that's what I would say for that. But luckily, I've kind of experienced those challenges before, so I have a good idea for how to adapt. But it's going I think this is for the best of ones, it's going to be really, really rough, and it's going to be very hard for teams to adapt. The best of 3s and best of 5s should be fine. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I think if I was one of the teams that was on the lower end, I would put so much emphasis on the practice before season, and utilize the fact that a lot of the other teams need to think about, what is their situation if they make a deep run into playoffs, and then make another deep run into playoffs, and then potentially go to MSI, and then come back and need to play for another split, and then continue that momentum. If you think about how you're going to utilize maybe your December and maybe even November, then maybe it would be very different. Yeah, the scariest part for me is that best of ones are going to determine the seedings for the groups in best of 3s. I think there could be scenarios where we're going to have very one-sided groups just based off of BO1s, because that determines the seeding completely. So that to me is the scariest part. Not the scariest part, but where we could potentially see some flaws in the system.
But I have a hypothetical question for you here, Yamato, which is that okay? So seeding is done is picked, right? Going into the best of three. So let's imagine G2 have an awful best of one. I'm just saying G2 because G2 sometimes troll the best of ones, right? And G2 are the number 8 seed, and Astralis are the number 7 seed. Are you really going to pick the number 7 seed over the number 8 seed for your best of 3 groups? I think there's a little bit of leeway in that.
No,
but it definitely is.
Wait, is it picked? Is it captain's mode for both groups, or is it just straight up seeding?
So I don't fully understand it, but I think that it's the three. They're picked by 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. As far as I understand.
Okay. Because if it was captain's mode, I think it would make like a little bit more sense. But if it's like flat out seeding, that is like you put 1 and 8 there, and then 2 and 7 in the other group, and so forth. If it was like that, it could get scary. But if there's some, some human choice involved, I could imagine that it becomes better for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, even in that scenario, where you're picking Astralis over G2, is it? You can imagine a world where 5 and 6 are very close, 3 and 4 not very close, 7 and 8 are not very close, right? Where that could also. I don't fully know how it's going to be done because obviously I'm just focusing on my team right now. I'll look at the format in 2 weeks, but like the you can still have an imbalance in any kind of system like this, and we'll just have to see how it irons out. But I will say that I do like this system because you're not allowed to have relegations due to franchising agreements, but LEC has somehow found a way to put relegations within their system without calling them relegations, and I think that's a good thing for the long term of the league. That's all I would say.
No, for sure. It is sad that that solution needs to be in place, because it's the problem. The fact that the problem is there in the first place is an issue if I look at it from a product standpoint. Because it feels like, we basically have a couple of teams in the LEC that refuse to sell their slot and they're bottom feeders. How do we make them spend more and become more competitive? We're going to give them incentives. And I think initially the idea of a franchise system is the idea of a partnership. But I believe that at least I've seen this bottom feeder. It's a harsh word, harsh way of saying it, but this bottom feeder mentality shows itself in other franchise sports too. So I know of teams, I've heard of teams in the NBA that definitely are trying to save every penny and are trying to just keep their slot, and they're trying to milk it for as much as they can. So it's a thing. It's definitely a thing.
Yeah, it's a thing. But also, at least in the NBA, I mean, it's worse in the NBA because you get number 1 picks. Like if you run it down, so it actually incentivizes that, which I find incredible. As a European, I find how North American sports works to be bizarre, but it is how it works.
No, for sure.
But for sure.
I know, Peter, you need to leave very soon, but I wanted to ask you this very important question. Because in my mind, when people ask me of my proudest moments in my coaching career, it's very rarely the things that they might think from the outside, because things are very different, right, from what they perceive. For example, last year, even though result-wise it was very poor, in terms of how I personally felt I managed my time and how I contributed, I'm very proud of that, And on your end, your reputation is always, the scouting god, right? This is what comes to mind. Peter Dunn, scouting genius. In your mind, when you think of your career, what are your proudest moments, and what are maybe also some of the moments that you look back at as shit? This is something that I will always be a reminder of something that I can do better.
Yeah. So I can actually tell you the worst regret of my career, and I know this like. It's just always been at the back of my mind for years, is at the All-Star game in 2017, I was picked to coach the Brazilian team. And I had the choice for who to select for our one-to-ones, and obviously BRTT had to be selected. But the MVP of the league was a player called Verta, and he was like top lane, like he was considered. So I put him in, and we had somebody on our all-star team called Cami, and Cami retired after that season, and I didn't realize he was planning to retire. And and the thing is that Verto played against Faker, and basically Cammy should have had the right to play that best of one just for the career that he'd given to Brazil. And at the end of the day, that was my call. Like everyone, and I didn't have the right to make the call that I made. And if I'd known, like, I just assumed Cammy would be coming back for years afterwards and we'd just play another 1v1 in another season. And he never got that chance. And I would say that is the thing that I'm least proud of in my career. In terms of the thing that I'm most proud of, it's actually seeing how certain people that I've worked with in the past have developed on the coaching side.
Okay.
And obviously, like, working as a coach, sometimes when you see kind of rookie talent, when you see kind of rookies come up, people get a lot of credit for this. Like, right, when you see Humanoid or when you see something like this, but that's never a solo effort. I've never been on a team where I'm the only coach, right? It's a team effort that we've put together. And when I think back on the proudest moments of my career, it's when I've had lots of coaches from lots of different situations, and we've been in rough situations, and we made the most out of those rough situations. And it's very difficult for me to go into detail on these kind of things. But when I look at, when I always try to leave my DMs open and things like this, but when I look at how people like, for instance, well, I mean, people in Europe would say Mac, but I think Mac was already a long way along his path before I started working with him. It's just people didn't know who he was. But I would say people like Lucas Pierre, people like, or other coaches that in North America who I don't want to mention by name because they will, it might be awkward for them. But helping see how I've helped people in those areas is what makes me the happiest. I've always, yeah. So obviously it's always great seeing somebody like Jojo or somebody like Danny coming up and or like Kaizo or somebody like this, coming up and being one of the greatest players in the league. Mm-hmm. But those stories have all been told already, right? Like everyone knows. But it's the stuff behind the scenes that's the kind of stuff that I look back on with the most pride. It's about building those relationships and those coaching things behind the scenes. So yeah, that's what I would say on that.
That's very admirable. I would have a follow-up question on that. I often get asked the question, it's like, how do I get into esports? I get this question 2,000 times per day at a minimum, and I'm sure you do too. I would. The main thing that I always tell people is that find ways to improve things, and people will come to you. On your end, that is working very often in building staffs, building rosters. What are things that you find you most often miss? What are the pieces that are most often missing for you?
It's very hard to judge the contents of somebody's character before you start working with them. That's what I would say. Like, and there's no amount of scouting can kind of do that. But so I think that's something that's the advice that I would kind of give as well is that specialization is what gets you through the door, right? Like it's being a more generalist is something that you expand once you're there. But if you're 7 out of 10 of everything in every category, no LEC team is going to immediately benefit from you, right? Sure. Whereas if you're 10 out of 10 in some areas and 4 out of 10 in other areas, you can contribute in other ways. Maybe you're like, the most about SOFM's jungle pathing of anyone in the entire world, right? You could like record his jungle pathing in a game in 2019, right? Just that may be interesting for a team that wants like a specialist jungle coach. But yeah, that's what I would say from that. The other thing is, yeah, at some point, trust and empathy are things which you can fake, but you can't really teach yourself. And at times when stress is high, those are things which will always reveal themselves. Like character, like at the start of the year, everything is easy. You go through a honeymoon period, but when things are rough, that's when you'll see who the real people you can rely on and the real people you can trust are. And those people, like even in situations where I don't have room on a coaching staff for one of those people, I will do everything in my power to help those people find the right teams and the right setups for them. And you don't go around in esports going around flaming everyone behind their back, but there are people that I will just flat out refuse to give references that I've worked with in the past, and I won't say anything bad about them, but I will refuse to give a reference. And that's what I would say about that.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah.
No, I think that's very fair. I think there's been cases where I've worked with people where their resumes have been very impressive, but then when push comes to shove and the stress comes creeping in, and the days begin to melt together, and the hours are needed to be put in there, and the stress of every factor of the players and of the situation comes at you. How you manage that is definitely super important, and I agree with the notion that this is where true character is revealed, for sure.
Yeah, and also, like, if you are a player and you've, like, let's say that you've been imported into a country and you go back and spend all of your time shitting on your teammates in the middle of a regular season, and that kind of thing comes public, how can your teammates ever trust you again, right?
Yes.
That's something that is always at the back of my mind. That's all I would say.
It's funny how there was a meta in the past where there was the shisha bar conversations, where I would hear every rumor and every internal situation of every team.
Yeah.
And I think it's so dangerous because like it's so dangerous to reveal anecdotes or some small information about anyone really, because they don't have the full context of every hour that you've gone through, and I think that's so important. So I've also really refrained from talking poorly about anyone, because contextually everything matters. Those details matter. It's like there's been moments where I've been angry and maybe did something that I apologize for after, and if that was brought out of context, then how would I look? And there are so many things at play that matter, and I think that's the good words to live by. The what I always say is I keep ammunition in my pocket. I don't need to fire anything. Yeah.
And I fully agree with that. And I think that basically, the longer you've been in esports, the more that if somebody wanted to paint a particular picture of a certain person, the longer you're in the industry, the easier it is, right? And on my end, I'm sure that if somebody really wanted to, and they wanted to say, oh, Peter really hates rookies, and here's all my one case study that I can prove for all of this kind of thing, they could probably do it if they wanted to. But I think that yeah, those conversations are rarely productive because it's all about discussing things with people in good faith, and if people want to make bad faith arguments, they can always make bad faith arguments. So I would say for that.
No, for sure.
But in any case, I really have to go. I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
My pleasure, Peter. We need to do a round two, because I have a lot of more things to speak to you about, but I think this was a good starter, Maybe sometime in the season, if you find a moment of time, and we can discuss the progress of your team, Heretics. But please, don't let me keep you. Thank you so much for your time, Peter. I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, and I love talking about back in the old days. So, let's go and swap some season 1 to season 4 stories sometimes. But yeah, again, thank you, and yeah, it's been a pleasure. Anytime. Okay.
All the best to you. Take care.
Bye.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was Peter Dunn. 1.5 hours. I have so much more to talk about with Peter Dunn. There's conversations that can be endless. It's like I'm curious about what his sources of inspiration are. I am intrigued by what he believes are his strengths and his weaknesses, and how he actively improves on himself. How he maneuvers himself around the off seasons, how he manages the conversations with players in the off season. A lot of things that are genuinely super interesting to me. So all in all, thank you very much, Jalal, for this one. I appreciate it. I'm assuming it's you, Gerard, because it's very similar to your the Discord name. All in all, thank you so much for watching, guys. This will be a full VOD uploaded on the tubes, the YouTubes, not the other tubes. I'll catch you guys on the flippity flop. Peace and